Good morning, everyone. It's been a real long time since I've been here and spoken up there. So I was asked to share about my journey here at Goodwood Methodist, about my faith, and then to just give an encouragement. And so I hope that when we all leave here today, that we will all be encouraged. So I've always wanted to write a book, and I probably still will. But when I think about things I could write about, there are many things I could write about. But there's one common theme, and that is God. There's no story that I could tell or write that wouldn't have God weaved into the very essence of it. In fact, it would be very impossible to separate him from my story, because the story is part of his story. I am in him and he is in me. If I had to die today and someone wrote the story of my life, it would be impossible not to speak about God, and it would be impossible not to speak about Goodwood Methodist. I grew up in this church. A lot of you I recognize, a lot of you I don't recognize, but that's fine. Change is good. More than 2 decades of my life was in this church. I went to Sunday school here. I was confirmed here. I used to draw pictures in the church bulletin when Andre Jordan was preaching, because he preached incredibly long. I think that man was going to do his own sermon on the mount. I learned how to read the Bible here. I gave my life to God here. I learned to pray here, and I learned how to worship here. How I loved to worship in this church. I served in kids' church, Friday night youth, youth alpha, adult alpha, even a little bit on the worship team, and even spiritual dancing. And I especially ate here. And believe me, I ate. This is where I learned that there are not 5 love languages, there are 6. And food is the other love language. On many occasions, I told my mother, when we all go to heaven, Goodwood Methodist Church should be in charge of the kitchen. And I believe that is still true. But most importantly, I learned how to love God here and to depend on him. Any builder will tell you, and I love the verses that have been said today, because a lot of them is something that God's been speaking to me about. Any builder will tell you, if your foundation is not strong, then the house is bound to fall. If I made me think of Matthew 7, verse 24 to 27. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. God helped me build a strong foundation at Goodwood Methodist, so I could have the courage to go. At my current church where I serve, I'm not allowed to play in the quizzes or any more Bible trivia games and that, because I said I know all the answers. And I said, well, I went to Goodwood Methodist Church and I had to learn the answers there. God has been really faithful to me. It would be impossible for me to tell you all the stories of God's faithfulness when I was here and when I left the Methodist Church. And I love especially how he speaks to me, because God speaks to me anywhere. He speaks to me in traffic, he speaks to me when I'm on the toilet, but he speaks everywhere. And that's the great thing about God, because it doesn't matter how far you run from him or where you go, he is there. And he always speaks to me in a way that I understand, because I don't always think like other people, the way other people think. He has been there in every high and every low. People always think that God has gone away through the tough times, but God is especially there with us. He has celebrated with me and he has cried with me, and sometimes I think he's laughing at me, because 1, I am actually very funny, and 2, I keep trying to do things my own way, and he keeps having to correct me. You know, when a small child insists on doing something their way, and you laugh at them because you know they're doing it the wrong way, but you know they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. And then you've got to correct them when they realize they were wrong. And I feel like that's when God laughs at me a lot. I've even fought with God because I don't understand a lot of things and I don't always understand what He is doing. Some people think it's a little bit disrespectful to fight with God, but I always think of Jacob when he wrestled with God. When you fight and wrestle with God, that is when you learn more about who He is. And at the end of that fight and at the end of that wrestling, you don't come out the same. It gives you a completely new perspective on life. Recently, I serve on my church's worship team, and because we are in a school, we have to be there 6:30 every Sunday morning to set up, and then afterwards we've got to set down. So it's a lot of work, but before we even start setting up, when the hall's practically empty, we do what we call the ESPN. So we pray, and someone shares an encouragement. And I was asked the last Sunday that I served to share an encouragement. And I wasn't sure what I was going to share. But I've been watching a series called The Chosen. I don't know if any of you have been watching that. And it highlighted a lot to me. But something that really got me was the Sermon on the Mount. So, for those of you who don't know, I am a high school English teacher. And I always teach my learners, your middle of your essay and your orals are very important. But what's most important is how you start your essay and how you end it. Because if you do not start it well, if you do not start it in a way that captures your audience, you will lose them. Okay, it will make things fall flat. And when I look at the Sermon on the Mount and the topics that Jesus wanted to talk about, He was very intentional about how He started His sermon. Because He started His sermon with the Beatitudes. And it's very telling for me how He started His Sermon on the Mount, that He started with the Beatitudes. Because something that has always been very clear to me across the Gospels is how Jesus was always able to meet each person where they were at. He didn't need them to be all cleaned up. He didn't need them to be perfect, but He met them where they were at. I mean, when you look at the disciples that He called, Mary was possessed with demons, Peter was fishing without much success, and Matthew was a tax collector, just to name a few. And yet He called them and told them to follow Him. If I read the Beatitudes, said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. If you look at the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus spoke about some really hectic things. He spoke about being salt and light, he spoke about law, he spoke about murder, he spoke about adultery, loving your enemies. Those are not easy topics to discuss with people because it would get people upset, because it would reveal something about the people to themselves. And the fact that He started with the Beatitudes was Jesus meeting the very large crowd that He knew was going to be preaching to where they were at. Some were poor in spirit, some were mourning, some were hungry and thirsting for righteousness, some were in need of mercy, some were peacemakers, and some were being persecuted. And so He chose to meet these people where they were at. And I think that's what people loved about Jesus, because in the Jewish law, people always had to purify themselves. They had to do a whole list of things in order to meet with God. But Jesus met people exactly where they were. He knew everything about them, so they couldn't hide anything from them, because He knew them completely already. And so don't think that God can't or won't use you because you somehow think you're disqualified. Maybe you think you're too young. Maybe you think you're too old. Maybe you think I'm not a great speaker. Maybe you think, I don't have the courage to do that, or I don't even have anything to say. Maybe you think, I'm not very good at prayer. Maybe you think, I'm not very good at worship. Maybe you think, there's nothing that you can give. You don't even have a lot of money. But that's fine. Jesus didn't ask us to come with lots of money. He didn't ask us to be brave or have everything together. He asked us to come as we are. God is ready to meet you where you are at. You just have to say yes, turn from your sin and follow him. It won't be easy. He guarantees it that it won't be easy, but he does say it will be worth it. Because a life without God is empty. I struggle to understand how people can live a life without God. The world is very empty when there's no God in it. Because where do you get your hope if your hope is not in God? And Jesus chose each and every one of us today to be a reflection of him in a very broken world. The question is, will you choose Jesus every day? And what would that look like for you? What would you have to part with? So what is it that you would have to give up? Because I find that often people say yes, they want to follow Jesus, but they don't want to obey God. And often where we fall short, obedience is the greatest thing that we can give God. We don't always understand it, but at a later stage, we will see God was working all things for our good. And that is what is very important. We don't want to give up the lives that we think that we are currently living is pretty good, because we have everything kind of together. But the thing is, Jesus called those disciples and they gave up everything for him. The question is, will you? And my last thought that I want to leave you guys with is, and will Jesus be enough for you? Because he has been for me. Thank you.